Aujourd'hui, on a l'honneur de vous présenter Justin Cantafio.
Today, we have the honor to introduce Justin Cantafio. Justin is a historian and a food sovereignty advocate, nonprofit leader, consultant, speaker, and Nuffield researcher. And he is a researcher. He is currently the executive director of Farmers Markets of Nova Scotia, a non-profit cooperation with over 40 markets. He's the co-founder and president of Canadian Farmer Markets, Canada's National Association of Farmers Markets, and founding member of the World Farmers Markets Coalition, funded by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Justin is one of the founders and directors of the Halifax Regional Food Hub Cooperative and one of the founders and directors of the Atlantic Food Action Coalition. He's also advisor of the Center for Local Prosperity, an organization specialized in relocalization. Without further ado, I will give the floor to Justin.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you, everybody. Déjà français, je vais parler en anglais aujourd'hui, mais si vous avez
I will speak in English today, but if you have questions, I will be in French. I will be happy to answer them in French, even if my French is not kind of rocky. So I will move to English.
Yeah, looking forward to jumping into things. I've been given 45 to 60 minutes, and I will do my best to keep your attention while I do that. Just let me get this going. And I'm wondering if everybody can see this all right. Excellent. Yep. Well, thank you so much for having me. My name is Justin Cantafio. I'm currently situated in Essegadik, which is the Mi'kmaq name for Lunenburg, or the place of clams, in Mi'kmaqi, which is the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Mi'kmaq people. As mentioned, I'm a relocalization and food sovereignty advocate, and I've been packaging these values into different roles over the years. That includes spending my master's degree living and working on small-scale organic farms across Canada, and I've been an artisanal fishmonger, selling seafood by the seashore. And over the past 8 years now, almost, I've been focusing and plying my trade in the role of farmers markets and public markets. And today I'm going to tell you a little bit about some research that I did, which was thanks to a Nuffield Scholarship. And for those of you who aren't familiar, Nuffield is an international agriculture and farming scholarship. Canada has a regional chapter and gives out about 4 to 5 a year in Canada, where scholars are given a sum of funding to go and explore out in the world a topic of their choice and bring those findings back. And I'll tell you a little bit about what I did and what I found and how it relates to the work that I do, and hopefully how it might relate to the work that you guys do in New Brunswick and beyond. It would be very good for me to just say thank you. I received a nice, very, very generous sum of funding to be able to do these travels from the Department of Agriculture in Nova Scotia, as well as Friends of Agriculture Nova Scotia. For those of you who know Linda best from FarmWorks, this is an organization that Linda's with. Taproot Farms, which is a wonderful farm in Nova Scotia. Dalhousie University's Faculty of Agriculture. And of course, the organization that I have the pleasure of being executive director of, which is Farmers Markets in Nova Scotia, that not only granted me some funding, but also gave me permission to continue working from cafes and other places in different parts of the world. So here's an overview of kind of where I'm going to take things. I'll introduce to you what my research topic was and where I went. I'm going to give an overview of Canada's current food system, and you'll find that that's a challenge the world over. I'll sort of talk about some of the guiding principles that I use that framed up my research about what farmers markets really mean to me. And then I'll explore what I learned and how farmers markets might address food systems challenges. And then lastly, I'll go over some recommendations, some key recommendations for how we might use our farmers markets to address those challenges. So, thanks to the funding provided by my Nuffield Scholarship, I had the sublime privilege of traveling throughout Canada, but also throughout Europe to France, Italy, Malta, Mexico, Portugal, and Spain. And then I also did a separate trip to Turkey, focusing mostly in Eastern Turkey along the Syrian border, basically along the Silk Route, exploring ancient farmers markets. And really what I wanted to do was unlock the modern context of what is an ancient institution. And I'll talk a little bit about the ancient nature of farmers markets in a little bit. And I really wanted to see, is there an unlocked potential for food systems change in Canada that farmers markets can offer us? And what is going on in other parts of the world? So I'll kind of explore some of the challenges that are currently facing our food system. I know that many of you are already familiar with these things, and something that I think is really important to note is it didn't matter where I went in the world, these challenges are pervasive. The global industrial food system is facing challenges, and the chinks in its armor are being exposed in real time. So as we know, food and agricultural policies in Canada and beyond have become dominated by neoliberal policies, basically advanced capitalism or a mutated form of capitalism that has led to free trade, industrialization, globalization. And as a result, Canada's food system, just like many around the world, has become increasingly corporatized, concentrated, consolidated, and conventionalized. Now, this shift in the way that our food system is structured, based entirely on an extractive economic process, has started to have many consequences, and these include things like eroding food insecurity. In 2023, 28.9% of the world's population experienced food insecurity. In 2022, about 23% of Canadians experienced food insecurity. In Nova Scotia last year, over 29%, almost a third of the population experienced food insecurity, and that number is higher. It's not equitably felt, it's higher for quote-unquote racialized households, between 37 to 38% in Nova Scotia. Various experts, including our own government, have noted that our food system is decreasing in resilience, and of course that makes us more basically easy to be affected by things like tariffs and geopolitical tensions. Now, there's also a farm crisis that's happening. This is happening in other parts of the world. Local food systems are massively underfunded. There are gaps in local food infrastructure, and these are preventing the growth or return to the sacred middle ground of small to medium scale. Canadian farm debt doubled from 2000 to 2019, and it's currently at record levels. Speculation, financialization, and development is driving up the cost of agricultural land, making it extremely difficult for new entrants. Farms are increasing in size, but decreasing in number. In fact, they decreased in number by 23% from 2001 to 2021 in Canada. We're further relying on basically automation and the precarity of migrant labor. And in Nova Scotia is a prime example of just what's happening in terms of a farm crisis. We lost over 21% of our farms, over 21% of our farmland in Nova Scotia from 2016 to 2021. That's a fifth of farmers lost in 5 years. In Canada, we were meeting about 80% of our food needs in terms of self-sufficiency. In 2000, that was down to 70%. By 2015, that number continues to go down. And a massive example of this is in Nova Scotia, where less than 50% of the food that we consume is locally produced. Corporate control and consolidation is on the rise in our food system. For example, 80% of our grocery sector across Canada is controlled by only 5 companies. And our very own Competition Bureau said this is literally one of the reasons why food prices are increasing for everyday shoppers. So this doesn't just affect our food self-sufficiency, but also our food sovereignty, the right of our people to define and control their own food systems and ensure equitable access to resources and prioritize the need of local communities. So these are challenges that I saw around the world. And this is Olivier de Schutter, an important individual in some of my studies. He was the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the right to food, basically saying, hey, I had one job, explore the food system around the world, and it's not working. So now that all the sad stuff's out of the way, I will turn my voice up an octave into another note and tell you all the awesome stuff that I truly am hopeful for. Some of the themes that guided my studies is, sort of being aware of what the farmers market model is. So at its core, farmers markets are a modern reimagination of the public market. And the public market itself is an ancient institution. There have been public markets on this planet since before there was even agriculture. They have independently arisen around the world, meaning that they're an innate human tendency. So long as we have had any sort of abundance or surplus, we have gathered, bartered, and sold and distributed food products at a public market. And that is pretty special. Farmers markets are sort of places where farmers and food producers are selling directly to customers in an animation of public space. So as we know, farmers markets could be in anywhere from a well-funded indoor building to animating a dusty old church to making a parking lot seem like the coolest thing ever for 4 hours a week. And that means that farmers markets are nimble. Canada has a long history of farmers markets. There is currently a little bit of a battle between two farmers markets or public markets, because the Halifax Seaport Farmers Market in Nova Scotia says it's been operating continuously since 1750, but I heard that the St. John Public Market in St. John has been going continuously since 1785, and they both say they're the oldest. So I'll leave it up to you, New Brunswick, to figure that one out. Our farmers market sector is growing, has been growing consistently since the sort of dawn of this new movement in the 70s. Now there's over 700 farmers markets across Canada, growing at a rate of about 5 to 7% per year. Other key themes were local food systems. We're aware of those, but those are short circuit elements representative of a community's environmental and culinary traditions. It's people, it's institutions. These are CSAs, food hubs, cooperatives, local independent retail, etc. Relocalization, which is something that I am very fond of and that I practice, is the process of rebuilding local systems. That would include local food systems and food sovereignty. And agroecology is a framework that emphasizes human, labor, biodiversity, scale-appropriate technology, cultural relationships, and community resilience. So these are some of the themes that guided my studies. So let's dive into how farmers markets can address food systems challenges. Now, this is taken from both my Nuffield Scholarship studies as well as my work in farmers markets in Nova Scotia, Canadian farmers markets, and the World Farmers Markets Coalition. First and foremost, this is probably the most important word for me, is the word embedded. I'm going to say it over and over and over again. They are human scale, street level, socio-cultural hubs. That means that they are integrated directly into the very fabric of the people that they serve. They are representative of people in place. A great example of embeddedness was in Paris. I had just arrived and was starting the European leg of my farmers market travels and studies, and you can see in the bottom right there the exit of a subway. I literally could not get into Paris without going through a farmers market. I thought to myself, this is a pretty good start. Farmers markets build resilience and adaptability into food systems. This is extremely important. They are embedded, they are representative of their community, but they are of and for their community. So because of this sort of adaptive, responsive, resilient, place-based, and nimble nature, flexible nature, farmers markets can be employed to deal with all sorts of things, whether it's climate change, major disruptions to our food system, such as COVID-19. We saw in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia and beyond how farmers markets adapted on the fly. They are also, I saw an example in eastern Turkey along the Syrian border where one of the largest earthquakes in modern history occurred. A farmers market there, the slow food market in Adana, was able to continue operating even though they lost their whole building and so much of the food supply was disrupted. Without infrastructure, they could still keep going. Farmers markets nurture communities, social cohesion, and trust in a lot of different ways. But again, because they are embedded, because they are of and for the people, they are public markets. That means at their core, they build public trust, camaraderie, transparency, traceability, and accountability. And what that does is it builds a sense of kinship and connection, more connected communities, which leads to social cohesion. Importantly, they also bridge cultural divides. One example is the urban-rural divide. They serve as third spaces, places where anybody can come to, in a time where there are very few third spaces left in this part of the world. They serve as key connecting points between farmers, producers, and consumers. And whether formalized or not, they play a critical role in food education and humanizing the food system, helping people do things like eating with the seasons and reconnecting with their food sheds. Now, these traits can be leveraged via organized programming to increase the consumption of local food, to have a variety of outcomes, and I'll explain that a little bit later. Importantly, farmers markets preserve and promote traditional foodways and culinary traditions. This is important. They are accountable to and representative of their communities that they serve, and in many cases, they are built by the communities that they serve. Also importantly, most folks who sell at farmers markets are non-commodity producers, which means they're not just producing a whole bunch of product for an ambiguous global market. They're growing what their community needs. That means that often the community has a say in what is being grown. And markets are culinary meccas where vendors are preserving and promoting regional cuisine. I noticed how incredibly important this was along the Silk Route in Eastern Turkey, for example, where at one farmer's market I went to, which was basically a bazaar or an ancient public market, I was told some 1,500 to 2,000 years ago, a farmer's market vendor said, "Hey guys, I've got this new product. You might like it. It's called baklava." This is where things like Adana kebab or salgom or these beautiful regional things come from. And they come from places like farmers markets. I also think that this is very interesting. When you have regional consumption of product and regional pride in product, you then can create an exportable product. So I think of some of the incredible wines, preserved meats and cheeses from places like Spain and Italy, where they exist because the community has decided that they have pride in this product. But then it can become a protected product that can be sold to other parts of the world. Importantly, farmers markets promote food sovereignty. So this is an example here, is in Jalisco state, in Guadalajara area of Mexico. This gentleman's name is Paye. Paye is a smallholder. His family has been farming the land for many generations. And while he's an incredible farmer, one of the things that he is best at growing is corn. Paye is also a seed saver. And I was reminded of the tenuousness of the cultural and ecological chain required to sustain ancient varieties. The corn that you see on that grill there are varieties that have zero value on a global commodity market. They take too much time. They're not uniform. Maybe they're too starchy. But this is the foundation of a variety of incredible products like tejuino, this semi-fermented corn beverage that has been consumed in this area for hundreds of years. Or the type of corn that is ground into a flour or a masa, which is then fermented through a process called nixtamalization that makes it easier to be digested and increases the nutrient availability. Nixtamalization is the foundation of tortillas that are consumed across Mexico and beyond. And it is corn varieties like this that continue that product and that availability. Paye is only really able to get a fair price for the products he sells because he has a farmer's market that he can sell at. And yet I see in these used containers a genetic lineage that could end at any point in time. When the only market that's left is a commodity market, we lose these types of products that are representative of people in place. And Paye, in so many ways, is a keeper of food sovereignty. Another example of the way in which farmers markets can promote food sovereignty is through Indigenous food sovereignty, which is incredibly important in a colonial state such as Canada, on whose lands most of us on this call today are guests. In the northern hills of Oaxaca, in a region called Cerro Quemado, or the Sierra Mazateca, the mountains of the Mazatec people, was a village called Cerro Quemado that I was extremely, extremely humbled to be invited to. I went out with a researcher named David, who's on the left there in the blue shirt, and his partner is a Mazatec individual. David speaks French and Spanish. His partner speaks Mazatec. And I was able to, through a process of telephone tag, have beautiful conversations with folks. And I got to witness the importance of how the farmers market connects to the way in which they continue to grow food traditional ways through the milpas, which are rolling hills of mixed production of corn, beans, and squash, or the agroforestry, where they grow all sorts of different products, including bananas, chilies, and chocolate and cacao. And it was so interesting. The morning of the market, I heard this like crackly sound, and it was like music. And it was like, and I was like waking up groggy in the cinder block hotel, and I was like, what is going on? And it turned out that they had somehow hacked the big, huge speaker that is used mostly to warn when there are earthquakes. And we're singing, like putting a song that told everybody in the neighborhood that the farmer's market was about to start. And I stepped out and I saw all these people kind of coming through, in many cases, like walking to the market on foot trails to come down and celebrate the farmer's market. And I went in and I was really excited. It was a small but mighty market. And one of the things that struck me was this little presentation that was given by the local school children. They were talking about the traditional agroforestry farming practices of their people in the area and the importance of cacao. And after that presentation, I remember going up to these young men who were just little boys, you know, on a bike having fun. And I asked them, hey, like, what's your favorite food? Because I thought, as I looked around this area, as I was driving there, I saw all of these farms that were consolidating and becoming commodity producers. I saw blue signs everywhere. And those blue signs all said Nestle. And all around me was traditional Indigenous land being transformed into effectively plantations. In real time, I was watching food sovereignty disappear. And yet here I was in this small village where the young people were talking about traditional food production. So I wasn't sure what kind of answer I was going to get, but I asked them, I said, what's your favorite food? And suddenly these little boys turned into like rascal, opinionated men. And they suddenly puffed out their chests and leaned back and started arguing with passion about whose mother's traditional mole was the best. And they just got into it, citing who had the better products in the trees or the forestry practices, who had the better sauce, who was eating the better traditional this and that. And I was just floored. And afterwards, in the middle there, this gentleman in the white shirt who called himself the big man, despite being quite a small fellow, he was the mayor. He asked me, what do you think of our market? And again, I was speaking through David, so I was speaking to French to David. He was speaking Spanish to this gentleman. There was all sorts of translation, but I said, you've succeeded. You've succeeded in resisting when all around you is commodification and colonialism. When I asked the little gentlemen of your village what their favorite food was, they said, our food, passionately. And as I was saying this, my friend David, who was translating, was crying. And by the time the telephone tag was done, the mayor was crying, the little man, the big man, little mayor. And he put his hand on my chest and he said, "Thank you for seeing us." And it was a really impactful moment of just what happens when farmers markets are run by people that agency and autonomy is built into what they do. Something else that farmers markets do incredibly importantly is that they can reduce food insecurity. Now, it's important that we don't get into a race to the bottom. Some of the food prices I see at places like the big grocery stores on the banners are artificial prices that rely on subsidies and externalities to get to them. And if our local producers are fighting to get the cheapest products ever, we will always go out of business. I saw this happen with all of the small-scale fishers I used to work with at a fisheries cooperative that was forced to fold because small-scale inshore fishers could not afford to keep fishing when the only price that they could get was the commodity price. That being said, at a time of record levels of food inflation, many products at farmers markets are just as, if not more affordable than what you might find at a grocery store. And they're also resilient. They buffer against things like corporate inflation. And I can give you a prime example. In January, Dr. Phoebe Stevens of Dalhousie University, Vicky Mazdiak of the Ecology Action Center, Lisa Gerhardt, and myself published a paper that explored food price inflation at supermarkets and grocery stores. And for most products, inflation was going up at a higher rate in supermarkets than at farmers markets, which means that they buffer against inflation. They also contribute to resilience, which ensures that we have a supply of fresh, healthy food during shocks and disruptions, things like tariffs, geopolitical tensions, wildfires, and other weather events that are increasing in frequency and intensity due to climate change. And importantly, farmers markets can be leveraged as embedded local food infrastructure to create programs that might address the symptoms of food insecurity, such as nutrition coupon programs. Nova Scotia has a program that's been in operation since 2019 called Nourishing Communities, where we give out hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of complementary currency every year to folks who are experiencing food insecurity. And they can use those nutrition coupons on any product they want at their farmers market. Farmers markets are economic engines. I mean that in so many different ways. They're small business incubators, they're job creators, they're import replacers, they're economic anchors. For every $1 million of food sold through a farmer's market, as a farmer, you create roughly 13 jobs versus only 3 jobs per every million sold into a grocery store. We also benefit from the regional economic multiplier effect. That can be anywhere from 2 to 4. That's what happens when our dollars that churn and spend locally, rather than getting siphoned out or vacuumed out into somebody's offshore bank account, like Lord Jeff Bezos, for example. And it's not some small chunk of change. Our farmers market sector is worth over $1.6 billion in Canada per year, just in direct economic impact. Here's an example of embeddedness that I found extremely interesting in a region called Asturias in northern Spain. Now, to most people, if I described this place without actually giving its name, they might guess it's Nova Scotia. I mean, it's coastal. It has a population of about 1 million people. The 4 dominant industries are coal, agriculture, forestry, and fisheries products. They have a lot of coastline. They have rolling hills full of apples, and they're known for their cider production. When I was there, I was like, hey, this is just sexy Nova Scotia. And while that was really fun, what was more fun was the absolute saturation and affordability of strong cider. I'm a fan of apple cider, but more importantly, seafood products. And then I was trying to figure it out. I would go to places like taverns, places that typically would not be known for having access to awesome seafood in this part of the world. But in the taverns, I was finding things like razor clams, sea bass, branzino, incredible products which were extremely affordable. And everywhere I went, no matter how small the village, there were often local seafood processing infrastructure. So I looked into it. Is this what's going on? And I determined that Asturians eat 25 times more seafood than Nova Scotians do on a per capita basis. And so when people say the local market isn't worth anything, I point to that as an example, because what I did was I found out how much is the seafood market worth in Nova Scotia for seafood caught in Nova Scotia that's consumed in Nova Scotia, and then I multiplied that by 25. If Nova Scotians ate like Asturians, then we would generate an extra $12 billion for our economy. Just by eating like Asturians, just by eating like folks just like us. But without local food infrastructure and with an export-oriented policy, it's impossible to keep that value locally. Something that farmers markets do well is seafood is in the faces of people of places like Asturias or Galicia or Portugal. It's everywhere, and it's affordable because there's still scale-appropriate infrastructure. Farmers markets support farmers in sustainable agriculture. This is really important because despite what big agriculture folks want to tell you, small to medium scale farmers still produce well over 70% of the world's food. And that's just people with gross farm receipts. That doesn't include peasants and smallholders who aren't registered. Most of the food that is consumed on this planet is grown by non-industrial producers. And most of the producers who sell at farmers markets use agroecological methods. Farmers markets provide stable prices. They provide price fairness, allowing producers to have a say in how much they charge. And they allow them to command higher prices for their products, anywhere from 40 to 80% higher. This is an example of how a government is helping to support this is a word that doesn't translate as well in English, but I love it in French, paysan. If I went up on the street and told somebody, hey, you're a peasant, an English person might get mad at me. But if I went down to, I don't know, Richepocto, and I said, bonjour, mon paysan, I would imagine quite a few people would say, hey, comment ça va? And in France and in other parts of the world, paysan or paysano is a revered word. And I think that that's very special. And in the Parc Naturel de Luberon, or the region of the Luberon in southern France, the government has provided funding to allow farmers markets to occur on public land to support small to medium scale farmers who are finding it extremely challenging to continue farming in a commodity environment. And it's incredible to see that there's a space where these farmers can sell and not get their products lost in a global market. This is another example that I witnessed in Xochimilco, which is a traditional indigenous region in the heart of Mexico City. I'm reminded that Mexico City was for hundreds of years a thriving indigenous community with its own thriving food systems, food production, distribution, and of course, food sovereignty. And Xochimilco, in many ways, is a living example of that past that never ended. Xochimilco is very interesting. It's basically a series of canals and these like basically floating islands created by the roots of trees. And what the Xochimilcan people do to farm is they extract a very nutrient-rich sludge, basically, from channels that they create themselves, and then pour it into forms to create seed starters, and then add it as a soil amendment or to build their soil up. And multiple studies have confirmed that this is possibly the most agriculturally productive way of farming in the world. And it's a process that is hundreds and hundreds of years old. And what I found extremely interesting was these farms are almost exclusively sustained by selling directly through community-supported agriculture, or CSAs, or to the local farmers markets in the region. A demonstration of how traditional farming practices that have low impact and high yield can be sustained by farmers markets. So I'd like to talk a little bit about some of my recommendations for how we unlock this potential and the benefits of farmers markets. And then once I'm done doing that, we can jump into some questions. So this is critical, but creating and enacting policies and legislation at multiple government levels is integral. We need buy local strategies, and we need legislation with teeth so that this isn't just window dressing. It's so incredibly important. A great example of this is Paris, where they have built farmers markets directly into their strategy to eliminate food insecurity by 2030. They literally said in the Paris Strategy for Sustainable Food, which was adopted just in 2018, that one of the pillars they'll use to address food insecurity is to build more and invest more in farmers markets. Barcelona is another incredible example of what happens when really good policy and legislation is enacted at a municipal level, backed by funding, of course. Now, what you're seeing in the screen here is a heat map that demonstrates where the publicly funded markets are in the city of Barcelona. Barcelona adopted a market city policy into its municipal bylaws, effectively stating that no Barcelonan resident should live more than a 20 to 30-minute walk from a publicly funded market. Now it works. It's not just willy-nilly. This isn't just a cute photo. Studies have shown that of the 143 million in Canadian dollars invested into farmers market infrastructure from 2020 to 2023, that it's working. About 2/3 of Barcelonans report regularly shopping at one of these markets every week. Now, it's also incredibly important, in addition to policies, to actually back those policies up with investment in local food infrastructure, human resources, and the markets themselves. We need processing, storage, distribution. We need scale-appropriate local food infrastructure because in so many cases, that's the bottleneck preventing us from scaling up community-based food systems. That's one of the reasons why I am one of the co-founders of the Halifax Regional Food Hub, is we need that scale-appropriate food infrastructure to help our farmers market vendors. But importantly, farmers markets need spaces. They need anything from just awnings, which help with season extension, to maybe something as quote unquote as advanced as what I saw here in a Zapotec village in southern Oaxaca or middle Oaxaca. You can see in the middle there, these are stalls, and stalls like this have been in the middle of towns in that region of Oaxaca for hundreds of years. And they often say in these towns in this region that there is a government building, a church, and a public market, and now you have a town. And those public markets often have these spaces where folks can prepare and sell their products, including things like serviceable kitchen space. So that's so incredibly important. Importantly is the fact that farmers markets rely heavily at this point on volunteer labor. And hats off to volunteers. But in a time when more and more people are making less than a living wage and working harder and harder for a cost of living that is surging, we are not going to have the volunteer base that we once had. As we get to the next wave of buy local, we have to be conscious of the disparity between rich and poor and the cost of living crisis. And so investing, especially government, in paying a fair wage to the folks who make farmers markets possible is going to be incredibly important as we move forward. Another example of just how policy and funding can be married is Malta. Malta is an island nation where well over 80% of its food needs come from afar. They have very low levels of food sovereignty, and the government has recognized that. So they launched a national buy local strategy where they decided to invest over 166 million euros to build diversified local food systems. That includes over 10 million euros to take the Takali farmers market, which is an outdoor farmers market, and to make it into a covered structure in the center of the island so that Maltese people have a predictable place and that the vendors have a predictable place. Another thing that's incredibly important is that we need to support farmers market vendors through diversified sales channels. I often will ask people if I go to a farming conference, how many people are getting stinking rich by selling their products at a farmer's market? And nobody raises their hand because that's not how you get rich. In fact, if anybody is trying to get rich being a farmer, I'm so sorry. But we need more than just farmers markets. They are not the only answer. They have so many incredible qualities, but we need to support farmers, the farmers and the food producers of farmers markets by giving them other sales channels to sell into. This also helps farmers take on risk and to maybe scale up their enterprises a little bit to get to a level of durability. But because authenticity and quality, that value is so important at farmers markets, is we can mobilize farmers markets as anchors for other opportunities, which includes things like food hubs, restaurants, independent retail, an ecosystem of local food, which we once had in this part of the world. Another incredibly important thing that I always have to mention is the power of institutional procurement, or the power of the public coffer. It is absolutely foolish for our tax dollars to be spent on food that is imported from somewhere else when we could grow it in our own backyard. And we are sitting on a massive economic engine if our public procurement dollars actually preferentially went towards local products. We could stimulate a resurgence in local food this way. And that is what needs to be done, in my opinion. Importantly, we also need to invest in programming. One of the examples that is really apparent to me is Campagna Amica, which is Italian for friendly countryside. It's a sort of program that was put together by Coldaretti, which is Europe's largest farmer union, as well as the government of Italy. It is a network of about 1,200 farmers markets, as well as countless farms, restaurants, and agritourism. They generate over 4 billion euros in economic activity every year. And the network now is representative of over 15,000 farms, most of which are small scale. And it's working. Over a third of Italians regularly visit these markets. And the branding is simple. They provide tents, they provide aprons and other branding elements so that these farmers markets can pop up all over Italy. And Italians and tourists alike know that this is where you get good local food. They're blindingly bright. The pictures don't do it justice, but it's like being around a sea of highlighters, and it's effective. And I know that we can do this in places like this part of the world. Nova Scotia, the government has invested in something called the Nova Scotia Loyal Voucher Program, where a $10 voucher has been given to every single student in Nova Scotia, as well as university and college students, and thanks to pressuring from our organization, new Canadians who come through Nova Scotia will also receive a $10 voucher that they can redeem at any farmer's market in our cooperative. That's like over $2 million worth of complementary currency that's in circulation this year, which is still, while a small amount, it can mean a lot to small scale producers, but also gets folks into the market for, in many cases, what might be the first time. And maybe they have that ratchet click or aha moment and suddenly realize that farmers markets are so much more than maybe they thought they were. That's how we can change consumer behavior. And when governments step up with funding to promote these types of programming and make them funding durable for more than just a year, for more than just a small pilot project, then suddenly we can start to make real incremental change over time. Last but not least, and this is not just like a footnote, I think this is a theme that has to resonate through all the work that we do, is that we can and should leverage farmers markets and local food systems for food equity, food sovereignty, and social justice. They are community-led when done right, which means they can build food equity, agency, and justice into the communities they serve. You know, there are examples of this, like the deeply rooted Black and Indigenous farmers market in Toronto. Another example in Toronto is the BIPOC New Farmer Initiative at the Sororun Farmers Market. Another example would be the Taking Root program that we do in Nova Scotia, which is a program specifically designed to remove barriers for farmers market vendors who identify as being BIPOC and or new Canadians. We provide free tables and funding and supports to help folks become farmers market vendors and try to get some of those barriers out of the way. Other examples are Sin Maíz no hay país. Without corn, there is no people, there is no sovereignty movements, like food sovereignty movements that can be leveraged through farmers markets, because farmers markets are of and for the people. We can use them as educational opportunities for folks who might not be as engaged with their food sheds as the folks who sell at farmers markets and regularly buy there. That's a huge possibility. And of course, another example of this is just what, like I mentioned, in Cerro Quemado in the Sierra Mazateca region of northern Oaxaca, is what happens when farmers markets are run of and for the community that it serves. So this takes me to some concluding remarks, and then I'd be happy to answer some questions. But, you know, first and foremost, our food system in Nova Scotia, in New Brunswick, and across Turtle Island, just like most food systems around the world, face numerous challenges. And I believe that farmers markets offer solutions to them. Local food systems such as farmers markets can be leveraged to address pretty much every challenge that the globalized industrial food system poses. Because to me, every challenge is just a failed opportunity. We need policies and investment to unlock the potential of relocalization. This can't just be another cute pilot project. This has to be the way forward for a new economics that is of and for the people, that builds resilience back into our food system, that builds food sovereignty and brings food systems back to the people. But what gives me hope is that farmers markets are ancient solutions to modern problems. And to be a little poetic at the end, I think that is because farmers markets are human at their core. And to be human is to commune, is to be together. And farmers markets ultimately show us the power of people, place, and food. And that's why I think they will stand the test of time, and they will be key players in food systems change that we so desperately need in this part of the world. So thank you so much. Merci tellement pour votre temps. I appreciate it, and I'm happy to answer some questions.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much, Justin, for such an enlightening, inspiring, and moving presentation. We have about 30 minutes left together, so plenty of time for questions. Go ahead now and ask your questions to Justin, either by unmuting or by writing them in the chat. Just a reminder that we are recording and we'll be uploading the video to YouTube and sharing it with the rest of our network. So if you unmute to ask a question and you have your video on, you will likely be a part of the recording. So if you don't want your face recorded, you can turn your camera off before you ask your questions, or just write it in the chat, and I can say it out loud. Let's check out the chat if there's any questions. There's a note from Kristen Alain who says, wow, such precious findings that you have shared with us, Justin. I agree. And yeah, you can stop sharing your screen if you'd like.
Une question. Oui, moi j'ai une question. Est-ce qu'on va avoir accès?
I have a question. Are we going to have access to the presentation itself? To the written presentation? Will it be sent?
Ouais, je peux te donner si tu veux.
Yeah, I can send it to you in PDF form if you would like. I also have a question. I have another question. Thank you. It was very interesting. Just putting into context the old farmers market, local farmers market, into a global context and a worldwide context. That was really, really interesting. makes me realize that here, we're up here in the Acadian Peninsula in New Brunswick. It makes me realize that we are really far from procuring what we need. We're very, very far from food security. And we are facing a problem here where more and more I missed that last part. 2-3 years later, they stop producing. So I don't know if that's a problem that is a widespread. Are there other farmers markets who are facing this situation?
Merci. Ben oui, c'est un problème.
It is a problem in Nova Scotia as well. I have many colleagues who are starting, who become farmers and retire at 30 from this, to become an electrician or something different, because it is very, very difficult in this current era to generate enough income being a farmer. I find that it is very difficult without the investment into the systems, into food systems, local food systems coming from the government. It would be nearly impossible at this point in time. I find there's two scales. Either you produce niche products for the market, or you become an agro enterprise who creates commodities for a world market. We don't really have a sacred middle ground because we don't have the necessary infrastructure targeting the needs of our communities. So I think that we need a strategy at a provincial level and even maybe a municipal level to really analyze what are the needs for each region. Because I know there are counties in Nova Scotia as well as New Brunswick where the food security insecurity level is higher, or the food security level is higher with a higher production level. It's very, very hard, in the area of Irving in New Brunswick, and we have a moratorium on of fishing licenses, for example, to have. These are impediments to have locally sustainable markets. And this is why I frequently say when I'm working with the government, we need a radical investment program and rules and laws that support this investment, not only in a pilot project facet. I love pilot projects, but I'm done with the idea that eat local, produce local is something cute. I don't know how to say it in French, but in English, it's pragmatic. We need pragmatism. So I don't really know the answer to your question, except I share in the sadness that youth have to give up their initiatives because it's just not affordable. I also have a question along the same vein. I'm in the Acadian Peninsula myself as well. And what I've been noticing since the vegetable markets have started popping, it's that it's really reserved for the rich. We can't talk about food security for the poorest among us or even the middle class, because the farmers, in order to make ends meet, need to ask a little more than your going rate for their products, because they don't produce an enormous amount, they don't export. And we never talk about food security
Ben oui, tu as raison. Il y a beaucoup de régions où ce stigma, ça continue. Mais en même temps, je peux voir en Nouvelle-Écosse, par exemple, il y a beaucoup de produits qui sont moins chers au marché.
In Nova Scotia, there are a lot of products that are not so expensive in the farmers market. We do know that the people who come to the market, they have certain that they're wealthy. That's true. That's the case also for other, and most of the people who go to the market are also white people. And that's true. There are some stereotypes, but we need to have a conversation regarding food security. It's not about prices only. salaries are too low, life cost is too high, the economic system is broken. We need to speak. We need to speak. We need to have enough to live and have food. And with the investment in local infrastructure, we can create economic scales that can help the little producers, little farmers, and they will not have to pay a lot if they participate in this food system. It is so expensive to produce a chicken when you are a small farmer. But things can change. I do think so. But those two conversations needs to be done simultaneously. Otherwise, we will repeat what have been done all this time. And because what we do in Canada is we don't want to do what has been doing in Canada. We go in the other parts of the world and buy because it's less expensive than in Canada. That's something that we cannot accept. And that's not something that we can keep doing. So we need to speak. We need to talk about the cost of living in Canada and how we can help small producers. Can you please speak about the money that is provided to the most vulnerable? Thank you also for asking questions. We do know, since we cannot find a solution to food and security while giving money to or to give coupons, but instead of that, we can help while reducing the symptoms. With the food coupons, each of our farmer markets can have 1 to 3 partners in the community that can be cooperative, and they can help. Those cooperative can speak with the people who are suffering from food insecurity, and we can give them a rate of 20, 50, 50. It depends on them, the $50 that helps them in the farmer markets. That works. Last year we gave about 450,000 coupons to hundreds of households, and more than 88% of them were used. And the data were quite interesting. So, for example, 90 to 95% of the people found out that they were eating better, that their health was getting better. Of course, and 14% of them said that 84% have the feeling of they were welcomed in their community. So when doing that, we do know that the money that has been used in the market go to local economy. If we do like, I'm not against the food banks or whatsoever, because they're really important. But if the food that comes, they come from the Loblaws or whatsoever, this money doesn't go to support our local producers. Well, I think in this program that we have is a win-win. We have a coupon in Manitoba, in British Columbia, in Saskatchewan, we just started, and in Quebec. And it's time, big time, to reach New Brunswick. Thank you.
I see some questions in the chat.
Yeah, there's one from Mario Doiron. Mario, did you want to say it out loud, or should I read it out? Maybe I'll read it out.
Well, I can say it out loud. My question is related to marketing. So, do you have any examples of strategies that other farmers markets have used in order to increase their market share, counteracting like the massive marketing budgets that grocery stores have, and trying to keep up and trying to steer some business towards local farmers markets?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's pretty hard when when even Superstore Galen Weston has literally created an in-house brand for their baked goods called Farmers Market. It can be challenging. We try really hard to keep things as positive as we can, but there is a leverageable asset in the form of a growing anti-corporate sentiment amongst consumers, particularly millennials and Generation Z, but we're seeing it across the spectrum of age. So, for example, our highest performing social media posts as a provincial farmers market association, which can be shared, and we give that information to our markets to use for their own marketing purposes. The highest ones were when we called out Loblaws last year for sending texts to people to telling them to skip the line at the farmers market. So we also, we recognize that we will never have the budget of a large entity like that, but we will always have the advantage of being of and for the people and being human at our core. So there's a few different ways that manifests, but one of them is we spend a lot of our time putting out visible merchandise that celebrates being a part of your food and your food system. Things like our farmers market tote bags, our t-shirts, and our prints are extremely successful, and we sell them at a wholesale price to our farmers markets so that they can sell it and make a little bit of a profit. And so that's been extremely important. We highlight the stories of the folks who sell at our farmers markets, and we humanize the situation. One of the biggest competitive advantages, and it's challenging, but it is a leverageable asset, is nobody goes to Costco for an hour and a half on a Saturday afternoon and leaves and just stretches out their arms and goes, "Oh, what a wonderful time that was. I loved that." But that is exactly what most people do after they leave the farmers market. And so we'll never have the budget in a time and age where people are being overworked and convenience is being sold to us left, right, and center. But we do have the competitive advantage of storytelling and of a human scale thing. So, something so powerful as just making a simple little 8x11 page that talks about coming to the farmers market in your community and putting those up on telephone poles or on the cork boards of the local restaurants and independent retail outlets, cafes and things like that. Those can be so successful. So I guess to sum it up, on a pound for pound impact level, local and guerrilla style marketing is way more effective. But we will always be up against the big guys with the big budget, and we're never going to be able to compete with that. Thanks for that question. Yeah, and I just want to amplify Heather from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada's message in the chat, which is to stay tuned for the next and final wave of the local food infrastructure program from the Government of Canada. I'm sure some folks in New Brunswick have received it, and some in Nova Scotia have as well. But that's an incredible fund. So stay tuned for that. I think you put the link there, so thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for Justin before we leave? Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres gens qui ont des questions pour Justin avant de terminer?
Do you have any questions to Justin before we finish today's session?
Oui, je vois qu'il y a une question de la part de Stéphanie.
I see that we have a question from Stephanie Casey. Good morning. First of all, thank you, Justin. Your presentation was very appreciated and very interesting.
In regards to, and I think you also saw that during your travels and as well in Nova Scotia, it's the rurality that we faced in a lot of our regions. And I love the Barcelona model and thinking that would be awesome to have those farmers markets pop up like 2 or 3 miles radius from population. But it's also to how could we what would be a model that could be interesting? I know I've seen something that, like, example that was implemented in Quebec, like a nomad market, donc un genre de marché mobile, si l'on veut, that would change from location to another depending on the week. Or is it just and again, that it does include different logistics as well. So I don't know. It's really interesting. It's food for thought. I don't know if you had anything or like any thoughts about that, or what could be a way to address that rurality challenge. Is it to have small mini
Yeah,
markets or food hubs and distribution centers, or yeah.
that's a great challenge. Um, it's interesting because as somebody who spent about 11 years of my life in New Brunswick, I know that at one point the rurality of New Brunswick was one of its strengths. There were a lot of decentralized community-based economics that up until very recently were of and for of the communities. My father worked in pulp and paper. I've worked in agriculture. I have many friends who work in forestry. I've seen just how consolidated in such a short amount of time it has become in New Brunswick. I have family from Heartland, New Brunswick. When I grew up, there was a movie theater there and like multiple restaurants, and now there's very little service provision in that area because one, there are fewer farmers and fewer folks working in industry because there's less industry. It's all consolidated and corporatized and conventionalized. So the long-term solution, in my opinion, is to leverage rurality as an embedded example of resilience. Something that I find along the Acadian shores, that there's still a decent amount of owner-operators that have access to quota and licenses within their own community, and still some community-based seafood processing plants that don't just export everything. So long term, it will be exploring the importance of antitrust, exploring things like what has Irving done to New Brunswick's economy by privatizing and controlling so much of what used to be owner-operated and community-based. So that's long term. Short term, as we deal with the problems of rurality, we have to have these like increasingly consolidated municipalities invest money in incentivizing people to come in and have brick and mortar businesses on their main streets again. Even small little places like, I don't know, Plaster Rock, for example. There is potential here all up and down the Woolastook River, for example. There are countless villages that can be reanimated. In some cases, they are happening. With regards to local food distribution, it can be challenging when you're dealing with rurality in real time. But one of the solutions that we've been exploring in Nova Scotia is leveraging your highest concentrations of population and using that to create smaller efficiencies of scale. So a hub and spoke model is something that we're exploring in Nova Scotia. The Halifax Regional Food Hub wants to serve mostly as an aggregation, storage, and redistribution center, pulling product from rural Nova Scotia into the volumes and sort of sizes or quantities required to service the needs of restaurants, retail, and institutions, but then hub and spoke or interact with smaller satellite hubs in more rural or less populated regions. And so if they were interacting with each other so that you had fewer empty payloads or trucks without anything in them, and products were moving back and forth, you could help to create. And we have so many examples in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia of underutilized community spaces, many of which often have commercially certified kitchens in them, churches and community halls, for example, that could all be with modest but pragmatic investment brought up to snuff. And part of what, in my opinion, should be at least semi-socialized food system. We've decided that public works and that education and healthcare should be at least partially socialized or supported by the government, not subsidized, supported and invested in by the government. I would love to see more examples of crown corporations, for example, filling in the gaps of inefficiency as we work towards efficiency, so that it's not just on entrepreneurs to take these risks in a time when the economic landscape of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia has been made so challenging for small business owners on purpose. So government needs to step up to reverse that. So that's a very convoluted, long way of answering. I don't think more farmers markets everywhere is the solution. We can sometimes run the risk of having farmers markets that don't have any farmers at them. And suddenly it's not a farmers market anymore. It's still incredibly important. I love craft markets, flea markets, etc. But we don't want to lose the authenticity of the farmers market model by spreading ourselves too thin. That's a really complicated answer for a very complicated question.
It's no, but honest, thank you. I took some very valuable notes and I understood where you were going at, and thank you. I appreciate your answer.
Thank you.
Moi j'ai une autre question aussi. Dans les marchés
I have another question as well. In the not necessarily farmers market, we call them local products markets because we also have folks who transform products. What do you have to tell us on that front? In Nova Scotia, there's a lot of transformers. We have some small producers, be it from honey or maple syrup or jellies or jams, that type of thing. Saying it's not just a farmer's market. There's not only farmers there. There's also folks that transform into secondary products. Certainly, it's very, very important for us. We also have, in Nova Scotia, we have the highest number of farmers markets per capita, but also the highest number of microbreweries per capita. And this is all interconnected at the end of the day to have this abundance. It's very important for us to have product transformers in our markets, to have rules that aren't too strict, but that do guide our markets. We say in English,
make it, bake it, grow it.
Okay.
Make it, bake it, grow it. So to transform a product, we can't accept people who are just reselling products. You have to actually do something to it to increase its value. Yes, because the rules and regulations do vary from one province to the other regarding secondary products. But like you, when I went to Portugal and I saw all of the fishmongers in the open air markets, I told myself, here it wouldn't even be accepted by the Minister of Health. You know, packaging over packaging in markets. We have to confront that as well. We don't have a choice because we do have to follow the rules and regulations implemented by the province. You know, I mean, it's not easy for people to sell. You can't sell butter and eggs, that type of thing, at a market. It's a good comment. It's very hard. When I was in France, for example, I didn't see cemeteries next to stores that were selling milk and dairy products raw. And I was thinking there should be a cemetery next to it. You're going to die if you all those things. No, these are ancient products and artisans that know how to produce and transform these products. And I think that it's very important. You know, it's funny, but at the same time, I'm not against all rules and regulation. However, they have to be sound and targeting the needs of our population, not targeting the needs of corporations who don't hold the same value system. So it also needs to change. We have a lot of comments regarding changing rules surrounding or to help the purchase and sale of products interprovincially, but we also have to discuss what are the rules that favor small producers. Another question. I think, do you know which companies in France, I mean, cooperatives in France, rather, there's a lot have started with volunteers who receive tokens, and then they go on and create their own markets. And the folks who receive the tokens pay less for food, but everybody has the right to come to the market, and the producers at that point in time is not as fatigued on the mental level. It's easier, and the project started in Quebec this year. We're going to analyze it at the end of the year, at the end of the summer, to see how this type of project could maybe be integrated into our own ways of doing things. But have you ever heard of this procedure? No, not enough to comment on, unfortunately. But I'm looking forward to seeing the results of your study, because it's working very well in France. But we're still anxious to see the results in Quebec, and we're on a trial basis there this year.
Merci, Jeanne d'Arc. Je vois aussi qu'il y a une question.
Thank you, Jeanne d'Arc. I see there's also a question in the chat. If we want to support the development of farmers markets in New Brunswick, with what organizations would you suggest collaborating on an expertise level? Do you have any recommendations with regards to what organizations we should seek collaboration? I know Suzanne Fournier with the Farmers Union is very, very capable. We also have Mr. Maxime Gauvin, who's very, very capable. And I think maybe Maxime is here on the call. But I know those are two folks who were at the conference where I presented about studies such as this. So we could start there, perhaps. And also, I think that your organization, Alimentation pour tous, NB, is very, very capable as well. So the offer is also on the table. And I know that my colleague Jeannick from the Public Market Association of Quebec, we're always interested in helping support the development of a provincial organization that would support farmers markets. And myself, I'm always happy to share my networks and my resources and partners. I have all sorts of guidances, informations that I can share. Just send me an email and I'd be very, very happy to offer my help.
Merci.
Thank you very much. And that's all I see for questions in the chat. Do we have any other questions to ask Justin? If not, I have one last that might take us a little further. So Justin, you're saying just tell me if it's a little too far from your comfort zone. But here in New Brunswick, there's a little more energy in funding given for the school nutrition program recently. And it's getting more traction and provincial and national attention. And I'm wondering, especially while I hear you talking about of the rurality and how we are so divided, it would seem to me that it's very similar, or the similarities with all of these school programs. I guess in your travels or your research, have you been able to see any examples where the markets are linked directly to the schools in order to feed students who attend the schools? Do you have any examples of these types of relationships between farmers markets or food systems and school programs?
Pas nécessairement, mais
not necessarily, but I do know that with our Nova Scotia Loyal program, with the Nova Scotian government, it's the third year that we offer the $10 coupon to each student. And each student will receive that at school. So prior to school ending, administrators will hand out the coupons, and they're usually very happy. They can go to the farmer's market, use their $10 on anything in the market. I've experienced it where, because the coupons are given to the students prior to school ending, I've seen that on field trips, it's pretty neat when you see 40 to 80 kids in a farmer's market buying chocolate, strawberries, anything else.
Ouais, ça c'est pas comme vraiment intégré dans.
It's really integrated
dans le curriculum, par exemple.
Into the curriculum, for example, but it's an example. And on the level of nutrition programs, for example, I know that we have programs in Nova Scotia as well, and it would be very, very important for each dollar, for every public dollar that is spent on programs, that it would be targeted to local producers. Maybe county by county, or it's an investment, if you will, which can support local producers and local secondary producers as well. But there is a lot of potential there, I believe.